Welcome everyone to the International Mentoring Community Mentoring Lounge. It's great to have you with us. I'm Dr. Stephen Hobbs, and Doug Lawrence is with me. We'll explain a little bit more about who we are, but I just wanted to highlight where we're going today, in that we are going to take a look at Mental Health Week, and Doug's going to share some insights about it. And then we're going to take a look at the connection between mentoring and leading through this way that we speak about it here at IMC, the International Mentoring Community, which is connection, competition, and collaboration. And then Doug is going to answer a question, a Quora question. He'll explain what Quora is so that you have a bit more insight into that. So with that base introduction, that's where we're going today. Doug, you wanted to share who you are and what you do with International Mentoring Community?
Yeah, my name is Doug Lawrence, and I'm co-founder of the International Mentoring Community, and I'm also the Director of Practice and Outreach.
And Dr. Stephen Hobbs here. I'm Director of Education and Certification for IMC and co-founder. And Doug and I got together about 4 years ago, and we said, hey, listen, why don't we get something happening here where we can offer certification associated with mentoring, mentorship, and being a mentor. And here we are today, and we are what I would call on a steep ramp that we're bringing this to the world, because we know the importance of mentoring, and especially as it connects into the mental health world. And I think it's worth noting that the International Standards Organization, ISO, has created a new standard, 45001, which has to do with occupational health and safety, with an emphasis on mental health in the workplace. And so Doug and I, with the International Mentoring Community, lean into ISO 9001, 24001, the regulation 17024. And if you're not quite sure what we're speaking about, we are going to do a show, a more in-depth show about this, but you can look it up. It's about leaning into the international standards that obviously international go across the world. International Mentoring Association community is who we are, and so there is a great connection there. But where we're going to go right now is Doug is going to share something about Mental Health Week that is in Canada, and there's other places in the world. And Doug, you want to take that over and just share some thoughts with our listeners today?
I certainly can, and some of this I'm going to read for the benefit of our listening audience in order to make sure that I get the points across correctly, rather than me trying to wing it. So it is in Canada this week, Mental Health Week, from the 2nd, I believe, until the 8th of May. And this is an annual event that happens, and it's in its 71st year this year that they've been recognizing Mental Health Week. This year, the theme is on empathy, and how the best way for me to describe that for you is that when someone, you don't have to fix their pain, tune in and see through their eyes. This is empathy. You can understand even if you don't agree, understand someone's feelings. This is empathy. And we may be different, but we're not on different sides. See the world as others do. This is empathy. And so they have a campaign that they have started, and it's focused on #GetReal. And why that's important is that many of us say that, in fact, I did it myself this morning. Somebody asked me through a text message, said, how are you doing today? And I said, I'm doing fine. And maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. And sometimes we say that when we don't actually mean it, right? The reason we say fine is that keeps everybody at an arm's distance away from us. And so we don't really want to get into any real social connections. And connections is part of our theme for our show today, and that's why this is a really good fit. But there's the aspect of it's easier for me to just say I'm fine, and you'll be happy with that, and you'll go away. And the other part is that you yourself, as the person who said, "How are you today?" you have to be sincere enough to want to follow up on that and maybe push and dig a little bit deeper. What's interesting is that each year, 1 in 5 Canadians, and this is just Canadian statistics, will experience a mental illness or mental health issue, but actually 5 in 5 Canadians have mental health. So that's all quite interesting. So we want you to engage with us on social media using the hashtags #GetReal, #GetLoud, and #MentalHealthWeek. What I also wanted to do, and I'm not going to talk to it very much, is I've provided, and it will be in the show more notes, is the 5 warning signs of mental illness for us to watch for. So that's going to be available to you, our listening audience. And there's going to be a bit more information around the aspect of what can trigger mental illness, or what can trigger mental illness. And I'll give you an example. I lost my wife to cancer in 2021. And every time that I would drive by the hospital where she passed away, it would trigger memories of her time in the hospital, and because we were dealing with COVID at the same time, and visitation rights and all that sort of stuff. And so it's a trigger that, causes me to recall or remember certain events that were maybe they were not pleasant events. And so there's a little bit of information that's contained in there on that. And some interesting statistics here as I kind of wrap this up is that about 450 million people globally have a mental illness. This is actually equal to 1 in 4 people that actually have a mental illness. And most of these people, roughly about 400 million, are not receiving the treatment that they need. And that's why this Mental Health Awareness Week is so important. What's also interesting that I found was that today, nearly 1 billion people live with a mental disorder. And in low-income countries, more than 75% of people with the disorder do not receive treatments. And so we ask ourselves, why do we ignore mental health? And so the only thing that I ask of you is join us. We here at the International Mentoring Community, join with us to recognize Mental Health Week and do your part to raise awareness of this silent pandemic.
And as we take a look at this from an IMC point of view, there is this connection. And Doug, you mentioned it. You have your own notion of trigger prompt reflection around the mental health. I will add to that is that I've had my own, and I've had to deal with some elements of my life because of things that I've seen and experienced over the years. And mine came out of war zones in other parts of the world. And I don't need to get into them here. Maybe another day. There's some parallels I can bring, because I learned a lot about mentoring while I was in those, and then following up after that. But from an IMC point of view, you really brought forward something of a study, a way of looking at certification. You want to just explain a little bit about that certification, because I think it's important for people to understand about what we've done with IMC.
Certainly, I can do that. So we have the Certificate of Competence Mentor, and then we have the Certificate of Competence Journey Mentor. And the Journey Mentor certification was brought forward or put into place for 2 reasons. The first was to kind of be the mentor of mentors and help guide people through the certification process in order for them to, not become stressed out in trying to get through the certification process. The second part was that in the research that I did, I certainly found a spot for mentoring as being part of the support structure for mental health, mental well-being. And that's where we work together to create the Certificate of Competence Journey Mentor with a focus primarily on mental health. And that's what's in place today.
Yeah, and we're bringing that forward, and I just wanted to emphasize it here because I think it's an important contribution to the world of mental health through the lens of mentoring, and that certainly will lean into some of what we're going to be chatting here about the connection between leading and mentoring. So let's use that as our segue into, let's call it the second part of the broadcast, which is making a connection between mentoring and leading. And to help us out, Doug, you want to just share IMC's definition of mentoring?
Sure. Mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship, relational based, where both the mentor and the mentee are going to learn and grow together in a personal and professional journey.
And for me, I add the sense of a strategic alliance, and the reason being is that it's often a longer term connection, and I like that term strategic alliance because it links back into the two-way trusted component. And I think Doug and I would certainly vote for the use of a word like strategic alliance. We don't necessarily have it in the full sense of our definition because we're attempting to use words that will touch people's hearts as it is. Strategic alliance sort of feels a little more out there, but I think Doug and I are going to be bringing it in more as time goes by. So this notion of leading is a great word as well, because leading is about providing direction so that you will willingly follow. It's also about providing guidance that you willingly accept. And it's about asking a question that you willingly answer. And this notion of leading in organizations, I think, is sometimes taken for granted, a little bit like managing leader, taken for granted. Everyone goes, oh yeah, I know what managing is. I know what leading is. We don't need to sit down and talk about it. And I would hit the button because I believe that every once in a while, and every once in a while for me would be every month, is have a conversation about what does managing and leading mean? What does it look like? Let's have some examples brought to the foreground. I could say the same thing about mentoring as well, but I'm just going to speak about the leading here. And I think it's helpful to go into one of the models, and the one that I lean into over the years is the one by Kouzes and Posner around the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And they present them in this order. I'm not necessarily going to say that in my presentations, in my own experience, my lived experience of leading, I would bring them out in this way. I would juggle them around and use them in different ways, but I'm just going to follow the way they've put them into their book, okay? And the first one is model a way, then it's inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. And I just want to very quickly go over model the way. The notion of is wherever your feet are pointed, that's usually the direction you're going in. So providing direction, are you willing to follow? Most people look at people's feet, and I'm using it both metaphorically and literally. I've seen people who declare that they are going to lead, and their feet are pointed sort of in that direction, and they're walking in that direction. And I sort of go, hang on a minute, I'm not quite sure I'm going to follow you. All right. And therefore, I would have some questions that I would ask. The inspire the shared vision, I think, is really important, is because the vision is a statement of what you see from the future, and you're sharing it with persons so that they might get an understanding of what's going on. Challenge the process, links over to managing. Leading is also about challenge the process. And there's a wonderful connective phrase here that I learned from a business associate of mine, Dr. Sean DePeron, and she was talking about the connection between being with media, and then I brought it over into the leading world, and she says, what you've got to do is you've got to learn the rules or learn the process. You've got to trust the process or trust the rules, and then you've got to break the rules. I talk about challenge the rules. What are you going to improve, focus, and strengthen? And that's linked into this Kouzes and Posner third one. And I've always appreciated because it got me thinking about how am I with a newscaster, a reporter, and how am I going to interact with them? And that was very helpful for me over the years. Again, the fourth one from Kouzes and Posner is enabling others to act. And the enabling is assisting the person to figure out where they're going. What's the path that they're going to take? And what meaning do they attribute to it, which then links into encourage the heart. And this notion of heart is often where you pick up the emotions, give it to feelings, and then look at it either fast or slow. And the notion being is that you can go with the fast response and go to behavior, or you can slow it down and go to behavior. And I think we'll probably do a deeper dive into that one, Doug, another time, because I think there's something there that would be worth taking a look at. So when we connect this notion of leading about model away, inspire shared vision, challenging the process, enabling others to act, and encourage the heart, I think you could say the same thing about mentoring. Model away, inspire shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, encourage the heart. Mentoring is very similar. And therefore, what Doug and I do is we often, when we take a look at topics where we put an and in, sometimes we'll put or. We very rarely put versus or but. So this is a presentation about leading and managing, not leading or managing, or leading or mentoring, or leading, it's about leading and mentoring. That's where we're going today. So let's just take a look at it from a connection point of view. I believe they're complementary. And when Doug and I had conversations over the years as we were establishing IMC, we would talk about, the notion of leading, because both of us come from a workplace point of view, and this notion of leading and connecting it with mentoring. And so we certainly saw it being very complementary, because leading and mentoring is really about finding the way for persons to adapt and adopt safer practices, because when you do that, there is a sort of a net benefit of safety, and therefore a net benefit of human development. And there is a connection here, and that's why they're very complementary. So you could say that leading, mentoring are two sides of a coin. Use that as example, as if you're looking at one side of the coin and it's leading, you turn it over and look at the other side, it's mentoring. They are connected, they are complementary, and to keep that in the foreground. But one of the things that I learned, and this is from my lived experience sharing it with you, is that I came to understand that the use of the term leader, and most people will put on their business cards, I'm a leader, right? Or the organization that gives it that designation for business cards and things like that. I'm always a tad reluctant to be able to say that I am a leader, because that's actually a term that's a gift given from those I'm interacting with. And I'd like to draw a similarity here, that the word mentor is a gift that the mentee gives to the person that they're interacting with. Now, again, I know when you go to different social media channels and all that, people call themselves mentors because they're attempting to give some kind of identifier. But the real meaning of mentor is when the mentee says, "Thank you for being my mentor," or some phrasing like that. Wouldn't you agree, Doug?
Yeah, I would, definitely.
Yeah. And that's when I know I'm in the zone. I'm interacting with that people, with that person, those persons, and so I just bring it to your attention, everyone, in terms of possibility of looking at it that way. Now, the interesting thing is, even though leading and mentoring are like two sides of the same coin, I would like to draw a little bit of a competition between them. It's a way in which to look at them and just remind ourselves of the use of those words like mentoring and leading. And I bring it to the foreground based on a really wonderful video called Celebrating What's Right with the World. It was brought to our attention through a National Geographic photographer who shot this video, and it's used quite widely in leadership development. And I think it's a great one for connecting to mentoring because of what we've shared already. But in that video, he interviewed a craftsperson, and he heard about this craftsperson who was working in Scotland and was weaving. And so he went to visit her. She was probably in her 70s, 80s. I can't quite remember the age, but she was certainly someone who had built up her craft. And he said to her in this interview, he says, "What do you think about when you're weaving?" And she thought and turned to him and says, "I'm wondering if I'll have enough yarn to finish the task." And she laughed then, and he laughed, and he got what she was going after. But then she says, "When I weave, I weave." And I went, "When I lead, I lead. When I mentor, I mentor." What I'm attempting to bring up here is, even though mentoring and leading are like two sides of the same coin, is that when you're leading, is being aware that you're leading, and when you move into mentoring, be aware that you're mentoring. And if you're going back to leading, because sometimes leading will use other educating approaches, that there's a connection here, is that you might use coaching or shifting or counseling as ways in which to support those who you're interacting with. And you want to be alert that when you're leading is, oh, okay, then I coach, I'm coaching. If I'm mentoring, and being really clear about the process that you're working with here. And I always think of it this way, is that with leading, it's always present. If you are actually supporting other persons, there is leading as present, and you will bring mentoring in. What I also understand is that when I'm mentoring, I will then work with leading and bring it in. But if I know that I'm going to go over to do something like facilitating or instructing, I'm moving towards managing now from an educating approach. So again, a lot of this might be, oh, that's really quite philosophical. Yes, it is. But at the same time, just like that craftsperson, when I weave, I weave. When I mentor, I mentor. When I lead, I lead. Attention, give it attention, right? Because I think that you will find that you will deepen your practice when you do that. And that's where I'm attempting to bring that up. So you might go, well, that's really not competition. Well, I'm just using it as a way to say is that there is this two sides of a coin, and just pay really important attention to it. Which then links into this notion of collaboration. How do they collaborate with one another? And I've already hinted at it already, is that the notion of mentoring is like an educating approach for leading. And another aspect of it is that mentoring and leading, they both lean into this notion of psychological safety, physical safety. Hinted at it already, is you're leading persons safer practices, and then you will support them in learning those safer practices using something like mentoring or coaching. So there is a collaboration between them, and I don't want to lose that connection. But I think a way to anchor this in, Doug, is to look at 4 broad, useful techniques that we both have talked about over time, and I think it would be great to bring it to our attention. But because of your deep practice, is there anything in particular that connects mentoring and leading for you that you want to share at this point in time?
I think 2 things that really stand out for me is the aspect of communication skills. So, and there's a number of active listening and the pausing technique and using questions instead of telling and all sorts of things like that play into that, under that big umbrella of communication skills. And then the second one is trusted relationship building skills. Is that, and it's what surprises me is that a lot of leaders don't understand that you need to take the time to build a relationship with your employees. You need to go and on a personal level, it can be as simple as, did little Johnny score any goals in the soccer game last night? And stuff like that. So you're building that connection so that the employee actually gets to see you in a different light, but also believes that you actually do care.
So this notion of communication and trusted relationships, let's just unpack those just a little bit more, because those are really important techniques and with the tips and tools that go with it. So from that communication being the notion of connecting something of commonness that connects you into action, coordinating the behavior. So when you're a mentor, you're actually coordinating the behavior of the mentee until such time as the mentee almost flips it and says, I'm going to be the mentor, I think, and I have something I'd like to share with you today. And you as the mentor going, great, okay. And that's that two-way trust, and we'll come back to that here in a second. But you actually indicated this notion of attention, being attentive to it, which means understanding the intention, right? And that goes back to the leading, the shared vision aspect of it. But you also mentioned something about responsive listening or listening. Can you just share a little bit more about that one? Because I think that's where I believe mentors, if you're going to go, oh, bonk, it's one of the places that'll happen. So, and we did shoot a video about that in terms of 7 elements of listening, that I think it'd be worth hearing from you where it goes and where it is that you can really strengthen that, Doug.
So it boils down to active listening. So actually listening and hearing what the other person says. And the only way you can actually accomplish that is by being present in the moment. And by doing so, by practicing active listening, then you're in a better place to be able to know, how do I guide the conversation from this point on? So that, you'll be hearing different, as I call them, trigger words in a conversation that's going to tell me I need to maybe ask these questions, or I maybe need to ask these questions. And then I need to be present and in the place as they respond to those questions, because that's going to guide where we're going to head next.
Okay. And then connected to that is the notion of storytelling, story sharing. Again, we shot a video about this. I think it's important that we just do a quick connection between storytelling and story sharing as part of this relevant communication story.
Most definitely. And so for me, it's about sharing my lived experience. So having that conversation with my mentee. And as we're going through the conversation, I am thinking about what one of my lived experiences, which one would it be, or which one of many would it be that is relevant to the particular topic that we're talking about today. Because then I can tell the story and I can engage my mentee in maybe coming up with a different approach to how I dealt with that particular situation, and just continue to ask the right questions to guide them to where they need to go.
And as you touch a little bit more into the feelings aspect of it, you could start to share the story in a slightly different way. Because sometimes when mentors are telling the story, they keep it kind of tight and not necessarily going into, well, this was some of the things that I was feeling at that point in time as my own example. And that's where story sharing really is helpful for leading. Storytelling can certainly lean into the management, but I think one of the other aspects we'd like to connect is story sharing and mentoring, leading. There is that sort of path that one can connect. Let's just take a look at this trusted aspect a little bit more, because trust is one of 7 ethical values, a way that we can share the connection. And words like trust, let's add caring and fairness, these other words like that. When we use words in this ethical value way, it's kind of hard to go, oh, I don't deal with respect, I don't deal with trust, I don't deal with caring, other ones that are, and you're going, hang on a minute, I think we need to have a little bit of a conversation, because those are important to me. And Doug and I, we will make sure that those are present for us when we're having our conversations. And it took us a bit of time when we first met. Okay, we've got to establish our connection. All right, we've got to get this trusted relationship up and going, and we're mentoring each other about where it is we're going. And now, as we built our own friendship and being friendly here in IMC, is that we've had to really bring that base of ethical values to the foreground. And that's something we continually share with those who are learning about mentoring. So am I on track for you in terms of giving a little bit more into that notion of trusted relationship?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. And I think in there is the notion of the ethical decision making. And we've spoken about it in some other videos. I think it might be helpful, Doug, to actually use ethical decision making at some point in time. Let's do a case example around it that will actually take them through 10 steps of the ethical decision making and bring it to the foreground. I think, does that sound like a great topic?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. So there's a couple of others that I just like to share with our listeners. And it comes out of the world of Forbes.com. They have the Forbes Council around leadership and coaching and mentoring. And in that article, I thought it was great. I sort of had to hadn't you thought about this yourself at some point in time? I was having a bit of an internal conversation with myself. And the person was talking about, well, we talk about exit interviews, and it's like a person's leaving. Why couldn't we do stay interviews? And my head popped up and I went, yeah. From a mentoring point of view, isn't that often what we're doing? Is we're having stay interviews with the mentee about what is it that might be useful here for you to stay and to, in a sense, learn and grow. Even though I know, Doug, you've done exit interviews based on mentoring, and we understand that takes place as well. But the stay interview, I just want interesting as a way in which to share something about mentoring and leading. Anything you want to add to that?
No, it's No, that's you've touched on it quite well.
Yeah, but you have used mentoring and exit interviews, because what you were doing is helping the person move out of the organization. Can you just share a little bit about how that worked for you?
Yeah, it's a process that we go through, and if we identify that maybe this isn't the right place for you to be working, then we go through a process where, um, depending on what the job market's like, and what I did with one individual was I said, okay, let's put a marker in the sand 12 months out. And for the next 12 months, you diligently, show up for work, do what you always do a great job and everything else. And if things haven't improved in that 12-month window, then we go to plan B. And plan B, or part two, whichever plan B is, then we start to figure out, what do you want to be in the next chapter of your career, and how are we going to get there? And so then we go through a process where, we start to look at jobs. We start to see, are those the ones that are going to bring you satisfaction and joy when you get out of bed every morning and stuff like that. And we put a line in the sand on where we're going to start to become aggressive in our job searching, job coaching, whichever term you want to use. We start to talk about when am I going to become aggressive? And then that's when job hunting becomes a job. And they have to go through a process that I get them to sort of follow in order to be able to find that job that's going to make them happy. And that's kind of the process that we go through.
Yeah, so that one being a little bit longer term, but you've also had an example where you work with an organization. They said, we're going to be moving the person out of the organization, but we'd like to do it through mentoring, wasn't that? And it sort of happened over a couple of months?
Well, I have had the ones where they've wanted to move the employee out. And through the course of mentoring, we were able to do a behavioral change and actually get them back on track to become that productive employee that, that they had always thought that they had. And even to the point of changing from introvert to extrovert, was changed how they interacted with people, had them become more of an extrovert, which was then a big shock to a large part of the organization, because before this was somebody who didn't interact well.
Okay. Yeah, I remember us talking about it. I thought that was actually to an exit. I haven't done one where I've mentored to a complete transition exit. I've not done that. I've done more about like the ones that you described, but I back in my mind, I thought maybe you had done one. So, okay, that's great. So the fourth sort of tip, tool, technique that I'd like to bring out is actually gaining a lot of momentum in the workplace. And it originates not necessarily just with the Dr. Brene Brown. She's certainly brought it to the foreground a lot more in the work that she's done, because she's looked at this word called vulnerability. And from a leading point of view, this notion of being vulnerable, in other words, being open to challenges which are ever present, all right? And as you're leading and these ever present challenges are coming up to you, it means is that you don't have all the answers when you're leading, all right? You don't have all the answers when you're mentoring either. And therefore, you're not going to go into the world of the BS, all right, and sort of fake an answer or anything. You're going to actually be vulnerable. And when you think about it from a mentoring point of view and leading point of view, you might say something like, hey, listen, why don't we both work on this and see where we get to? Because there's something I think I can learn here as well as the mentor, and then interacting together. And that's where the mentee can sometimes become the mentor, because they're bringing their own research, their search for ideas, and bringing it in to the conversation, so you can learn together. And what Doug and I did was we found a couple of videos where we actually put one in the show more notes, so you'll find it below. It's a bit of an older one. Again, if you that was 2013 by what I mean by older one. The notion is that you can certainly look up Dr. Brene Brown and see what else is there. But there's other words that I will connect with this notion of the vulnerability. And words like courage, calmness, creativity, challenge. I think if you go to the leadership ones, Kouzes and Posner's, there's connections between those and how do you play them out? And I would encourage, if you're listening in, go look up those words and then add to that wholeheartedness. Look up that word as well and see, as a mentor, can you bring them into the foreground so that when you know that you're in this role of mentoring and serving as a mentor, the gift is coming from a place of the mentee to you to highlight the courage you're sharing, the calmness, the wholeheartedness, the creativity, the challenge that you're going through. And I just wanted to add those words in. There's lots more that you can get into, like patience, flexibility, discretion. And I think that's a great place to start. And if you find that there is some ideas you want to share, then put them in the comments section below. Love to be able to read what you've come up with and be able to see how we can continue to learn with you. So that would be wonderful as well. And I think it's probably appropriate to remind you, subscribe to the channel. It'd be wonderful for you to be able to help us out to move our channel along in the algorithm world of YouTube. So thanks for that by doing that. But guess what, Doug? It's time for the Quora question. I don't think I'll be a voiceover on radio at this point in time. But Quora question. So Quora, what's Quora and what's the question and what are you going to share with us today?
So Quora is a website where people can go and post questions and actually answers to questions on the website based on different categories. And so the categories that I typically watch for are mentoring and business mentoring. And I'm ranked in the top 10 responders for the mentoring questions and stuff like that. So what I did was I took a lot of the questions and I kind of massaged them together. So the question for today is, I want to be an entrepreneur and start my own business. Do I need a mentor? And what qualities do I need to be looking for? And my response is, mentors provide three main benefits to entrepreneurs as they build their high growth startups into successful companies. Number one, mentors open doors. A good mentor will introduce you to the right people to accelerate your business objectives. Number two, mentors are a part of your team. Instead of giving advice, mentors encourage and give you an outside perspective and fresh eyes to a problem or challenge. Number three, mentors hold you accountable. Instead of telling you what to do, mentors help you set key objectives and then hold you accountable to executing against them. If you're an entrepreneur looking for mentoring from a current or potential venture investor, ask yourself if they have what it takes to commit to a mentoring relationship. Not everyone knows how to mentor. It's a delicate balancing act of building mutual trust between two people. Here are qualities a great mentor provides. Number one, candor. Don't look for a buddy or a friend, but instead an honest person with deep experience, not necessarily in your industry, who is open to building a relationship based on mutual respect and trust. Number two, competence. A great mentor is extremely good at what he or she does and has deep knowledge of areas of expertise. Number three, lived experience. Have they done it before? Make sure your potential mentor has been through the trenches, whether that's as a founder, CEO, or in a strategic operational role so you can learn from their experience, excuse me, and avoid pitfalls. Entrepreneurs who have a mentor have a key advantage. If you build a trusted relationship, you will have someone that you can bounce ideas and concerns off, someone who will always answer your calls, texts, and emails. You've got a huge head start over go-it-alone competitors. Great venture investors offer more than advice and guidance. They provide mentorship. And as they say, advice is cheap, but mentorship is worth its weight in gold.
So there are some persons that are sharing on one of the social media channels, digital marketing channels, that you really don't need mentors. You can just go to Google and you get everything that you require to be able to move yourself forward. And I think you're offering, it's not a no to that, but there's more to it than just go to Google, get everything you need. There's something here about actually this notion of a face-to-face or a Zoom meeting or whatever it might be. You want to just give us your 2 toonies worth out of Canada about that statement? Just go to Google, you'll get everything you need.
You're going to be missing out on a number of other things. You're going to be missing out on the relationship, the trust that you would normally get. And I just recently had an example of a good colleague of mine who indirectly we're mentoring, but who is looking at selling their business and having a difficult time. And I made a connection for them that is probably going to be very fruitful.
Yeah, and I always think of it this way, is that actually interacting with the person, your mentor, you get into what I call the background conversation. You get into, oh, okay, I'm getting more. I might even get into the feelings. I might get into, if I use the white space on an organization chart, you're getting into more of the subtleties and that. Whereas like if you go and grab what you need off of Google, it's what I call a foreground conversation. You got what you need, but it doesn't mean you truly understand the fitness or the extension of why into the whole. You've got what you've got, great, but it doesn't mean that you get the subtleties and that background conversation. So I actually answered the person with that response, and they didn't come back. A couple of people liked my post, so I'm not quite sure where I stand with that in the world of that social media channel. But I gave my 2 toonies worth, so there you go. That was kind of fun to see. So as we draw ourselves to a close on this broadcast, again, remind you, please subscribe. It helps us move along in the algorithm. And again, if you've got comments, so appreciate reading what it is that you've got to say. And as all of the mentoring lounges, because I do the introduction, Doug gets the outgoing message. And once he's done that, I'll just say, thank you, take care kind of idea, as Doug does. And then we're just going to end the broadcast. So Doug, it's over to you.
Well, thank you. And in honor of the Mental Health Week, we encourage you to engage with us on social media using the hashtags, #GetReal, #GetLoud, and #Mental Health Week. And have a great week.
Take care.